Channel 2, English. Channel 2, English. Channel 2, English. Channel 2, English. Channel 2, English.
Good morning, bonjour, everybody. Welcome to our S&T Group press conference. Due to the sad passing away of our group's president's father, Irache Garcia's father, she is not here this session, and it is then, of course, our pleasure to welcome Pedro Marques, our vice president, to replace our group president today. And then, of course, there will be time for your questions.
Thank you, Ute. Indeed, let me start by saying that our thoughts are indeed with Irache. It's been a horrible year for her on a personal term, and we just hope that she continues to fight as she has been doing throughout all her life, and particularly her career. But we are by her side, of course, in this difficult moment. So, regarding this week and topics, first of all, of course, I would like to highlight the 2-year anniversary of the war in Ukraine, the difficult situation on the ground, and the impossible situation for democratic forces as well in Russia, the death of Navalny, his braveness, his courage of keeping on fighting this regime from the inside, and unfortunately that even meant losing his life. In the middle of this, we will be hosting Yulia Navalny, as you know, in the plenary. It will be a very solemn moment in which we do remember the fight for freedom in that country. But of course, with the statement of the COP last week, with the statement of President Metsola now, I mean, we have been by the side of Ukraine. We have been certainly by the side of the democratic forces in Russia, but we have been by the side of Ukraine, and we will remain by the side of Ukraine. We have just approved the 13th package of sanctions. We are voting this week, finally, both the revision of the MFF and the final hurdle for the Ukraine facility, the 50 billion Ukraine facility, a very important moment as well. And we have been pledging for the continued support, military support to Ukraine through this war. So we will continue to stand by the side of Ukraine, and we want also to recognize the important news that we got of Sweden finally joining NATO. This is also the result of the actions of Mr. Putin. Moving to a different stance, I would like to highlight that this weekend we will have our PES Congress. Important topics that will also be discussed this week here in Strasbourg will be certainly in our manifesto, in our political discussions, and will be part of the most important calls and policies defended by our lead candidate, Nicola Schmidt. As you know, we will be electing our Spitzencandidate, but also approving a manifesto that really pledges for strong support to the Europeans, to the SMEs, to the families on the transitions, on the digital, on the green transition, continuing with the transitions, supporting the families in the cost of living crisis. That will be quite of an important feat. Also, EPP has a Congress soon. They have announced finally that President von der Leyen will run as a Spitzen as well. They had a joint press conference, and we have also some questions in a sense. It would be important to understand where does this now candidate to be president of the Commission stands, for instance, on the nature restoration law. EPP just announced, apparently, you might have gotten that confirmation here just minutes ago, that they will vote against the nature restoration law. So they have a bunch of governments in the Council, as they always say proudly, Mr. Weber. These governments were supporting the agreements on the trilogue. They even had a rapporteur that is now a chief of staff of a commissioner for the Green Deal that was negotiating this agreement in the trilogue, and now EPP goes against all of that. So, and goes against certainly the policies defended by the Commission of President von der Leyen. We are curious to understand where do they stand finally on this, and certainly their Spitzencandidate on this position by the EP party. It's just a question that I'm sure that will come back in some press conference in the future around this candidacy. EPP also has said that they will be pro-European, pro-rule of law. But at the same time, they have in their ranks, in their affiliated parties, parties like the party of Mr. Vucic, that has been basically the most pro-Russian of these parties in Europe at this stage, basically defending a bunch of policies that are certainly not pro-European, and in terms of rule of law with these rigged elections just recently. And this is a prominent party within EPP. We have had Mr. Salvini, that is part of a coalition for government with EPP's party in Italy, that failed to condemn the murder of Navalny. We have had Fratelli d'Italia's leader, Mrs. Meloni, failing to condemn what happened in Acca Larenzia. So a bunch of questions that should be put to this pro-European, pro-rule of law EPP about these partners that they have been flirting and even marrying in some governments in Europe. These are questions that certainly will come within the campaign. But about the nature restoration law, we, as I said, are quite surprised about this final position of the EPP. We still hope to win this vote. We have been fighting for this from the beginning. EPP was against this law continuously. Then they were within the negotiations of the trilogues. Then their governments in the council supported the agreement, and then they come back with this position. So we still hope to win, but this disinformation, this idea that they are voting because they care for the farmers, this is absolutely unacceptable. This is just populistic, and this is misleading the Europeans and certainly our farmers. Laws have to be certainly improved to help our farmers, help our citizens in the transitions, but denying the Green Deal or denying the climate emergency is certainly not the way to go and to solve our problems. So that's certainly something I would like to say, and I would also like to have a final message towards what happened in Brussels yesterday and the protests. The protests are absolutely legitimate. We do care about the conditions of every citizen in the transitions and in their daily lives, but violence is not acceptable. That's not proper in a democratic union as it is ours. This would be my final comment at this stage. Now I would stop and be ready to answer your questions. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Pedro. We start in the back, please. First, please introduce yourself and question. Thank you.
Oui, bonjour. Good morning. I'll be taking the floor in French. For Brussels 2, Emmanuel Strasbourg. What is the role of European defence in your manifesto?
I will answer in English if you don't mind. We have been, as I said in my introductory remarks, we have been very strongly supporting Ukraine from the beginning. And I would argue that it was important that my political family stood unequivocally by the side of Ukraine, even supporting, and some of the bigger governments in Europe, the ones that have actually provided, not just with rhetorics, but with actions, resources to the Ukrainians, come from my political family. And that's certainly something that I would like to highlight. So for us, a more geopolitical Europe, in actions and not just in words, it's something that will actually have to happen in these next few years. We do see that NATO has to continue to have its role in a collective defense in Europe, but we as Europeans have to do more within our NATO alliance, and we have to be stronger in our NATO alliance and certainly supporting more the Ukrainians with concrete actions. So, I mean, everything is up to be discussed at this stage. We can reinforce our military capacities through the industrial capacity. It's very important that we focus on European industrial capacities to collectively improve our capacities then on the military ground. So a lot of discussion will happen from now on, but we do need to, with concrete actions, we do need to continue to support Ukrainians, as we just did with the approval, or as we will do finally this week with the approval of the Ukraine facility. Thank you.
Thank you. Eddie, please.
Thank you, Eddie Wax from Politico. When you talk about your Congress in Rome coming up, the polls in your country, Portugal, are not looking great at the moment for your party. And, you know, the EPP is always boasting about having 12 governments around the UCO, maybe 14, when the top jobs are being handed out. Do you fear that social democracy is slipping into a kind of very low second place? And that kind of the election result looks kind of inevitable. What's your plan to reverse that?
Thank you, Eddie. I mean, if you look at these European polls, what you see is that us and DPP, we are solid on the two first ranks, I would say, polling in the different polls that have been gathered. So these two big political families will have an important responsibility to the next term. We are fighting to win the European election. We can win the European election, by the way. And if you talked also about my member state, my country, you can also see from those polls that the polls are neck to neck. This is a very specific situation in my country. We come from this absolute majority interrupted by this press statement by the judiciary system, a very complex situation, no concrete accusation to the Prime Minister, but finally he stepped down to allow for democracy to work properly. We are neck to neck with the centre-right party, with this coalition in the centre-right. And I guess in Europe, as I said, we are fighting to win the European election, and we will fight for the pro-European values before the campaign and after the campaign. And that's what the question that will also be put to Mr. Weber and to the EPP. This kind of coalitions, this kind of rhetoric that we had, for instance, on the restoration law now, is this something that will continue after the election? Something to be seen. But we are fighting to win the European election, and we are really, really far apart from all the other groups, aside, naturally, with the EPP. So we are running with them neck to neck, and the rest quite a bit distant. So I say that our message, the progressive message, has fared well these last few years. The citizens continue to trust us, and will be very relevant in the next Parliament. That's absolutely sure for many of these polls that you can see.
Thank you. Yes, we turn to the right, Pedro.
Hello, Pietro Quastamacchianza. Tonight, the Italian Democratic Party won the regional election in Sardinia in a list with the Five-Star Movement. What does tells in terms of coalition possibilities for the socialists in Italy and maybe on a European level as well? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. Even if it's a regional election, I guess it goes with the general mood that I just referred to. We are faring well as a democratic party in Italy and as a democratic pro-European party all over Europe. It's just a sign of the work that Ellie is doing in Italy and all the party there. We have been the real opposition, I would say, to this center-right, far-right coalition with this, I mean, as I referred at the beginning, with some moments that are really, really to be condemned, like this situation by Salvini failing to condemn the murder of Navalny, just to give an example. The situation in Rome a few weeks ago. I mean, there's simply too much going on. And this normalization by EPP of these coalitions with the far right is something that, fortunately, we have been fighting also strongly in Italy with the good result that I would like to salute. Thank you.
Yes, please.
Hi, good morning. Francesco Bortoletto, Europa Today. You said, Mr. Marquez, that you're committed to the process of the Spitzenkandidat, but you said so even 5 years ago and ended up supporting a nominee who hadn't run as candidate and who you've been criticizing during this briefing, actually. So my question for you is, what will you do in case the European Council nominates another person who's not running as a candidate for any party? And also, how is your own selection process for Commissioner Schmidt? Anything like democratic if he's the only candidate for the position? Thank you very much.
Well, what I can tell you is that, if you well remember, 5 years ago, we fought hard for a candidate that was Franz Timmermans, that I still argue that would have been a great president of the Commission. Basically, he was the leader of what is now called the European Green Deal, but he was behind the creation of this European Green Deal. So we fought hard for a Spitzencandidate to become president of the European Commission. Finally, that was not the agreement on the Council, but that was our fight there. And we will, and we just presented, or we will approve this weekend, a Spitzencandidate again, because we believe in this process. This idea that we have a face to bring to the Europeans, to say clearly, this is the face of our candidacy, of our policies, that's the most important. And exactly what I just said, of the policies. By the way, I did not criticize Mrs. von der Leyen. I put a bunch of questions, or I kind of put questions as if she was here in a press conference as well. It's about the coherence of the candidate with the policies. That was what we did also 5 years ago. When she was finally voted by the Council, we managed to squeeze into the program the Green Deal, the minimum salaries, the unemployment reinsurance benefit. All of these were the conditions for us to vote that candidate. And after this election, it will be yet again like that. It's about the candidate, but it's about the policies. So will you continue to support the Green Deal? Our candidate certainly does. Will you support people in the transitions? Our candidate does. Then we'll see what are the questions to be put to the eventual candidate to President of the Commission.
Thank you.
Sorry, and about Commissioner Schmidt? Like,
Well, look, I don't... What can I tell you about that? I mean, the process was completely open. There was a lot of negotiation. Sorry, this podium is a bit tricky, but because I brought the computer. We had our normal negotiation and evaluation within our parties. Nicholas was finally the only one being put forward, but we had a large discussion, and we have now the normal appointment within the party with a vote in the Congress. So I don't even see how you can say that it's not a democratic process. It was completely open. We could have had 10 candidates if they would have been presented. So no, I mean, there were no conditions being put. No, it was a completely free process. And finally, Nicholas is a great candidate. He's the face of our most, I mean, you saw what I referred, the unemployment reinsurance, the minimum salaries. Nicholas was the face of all of this, of the Porto agenda. So, I mean, he's a great candidate for a progressive political family. It's a very good choice. And certainly a democratic one. It was completely open within the party. Thank you.
Thank you. Anna, please.
My question is about the situation.
Anna, please introduce
Anna
yourself.
Wadensky from Europe Diplomatic. My question is on Russia, because you mentioned Navalny political assassination. And with this regard, my question is about the recognition of the upcoming elections on the 17th of March, because this happened in atmosphere of repressions. There are plentiful of political prisoners now, and people were imprisoned for simply laying flowers to victims of Stalin repressions.
Cannot but agree with you. These elections are far from democratic from the perception we get, from all the information we get. Possible candidates, possible opposition candidates, democratic candidates were impeded to run, so even some of them becoming political prisoners as well. So, I mean, these elections are just one more episode of this Putin regime, and the lack of democracy in Russia is also clearly mirrored into these elections. So I cannot but agree with you.
Thanks a lot. Do we have more questions?
Yes.
Yes.
Apparently there.
Again in the back. Yes, please.
Oui, une autre question en...
Yes, another question, just responding to an alert that was raised by a Green member, Saskia Brickman, yesterday, recommending to all European members to check their phones and to check that they hadn't been infected by spy software. Have you followed up on that?
What I can tell you is that I am behind on that. I will do that with my phone. Being responsible for foreign affairs, I guess it's wise to do so. I should have done it already. And as you know, even some colleagues from my group were already in this situation. So yes, we are very attentive to this. We have a debate this week, by the way, on that matter, but it's not just about the debate. It's concrete action. And indeed, we have had the pattern I mean, some opposition leaders in some member states, by the way, with their phones tapped, journalists with phones tapped. So we do have to be very careful. And as a group, have been put that as a priority. And I will follow it with actions on my case. I will do indeed this verification of my phone. And I guess my colleagues from the area of foreign affairs, I guess most of them will do the same.
Thank you. Do we have more questions? Did I miss anybody? If that is not the case, thank you very much. Thank you, Pedro Marques, and have a good rest of the week.
Thank you.